Hello, everyone, and welcome to Supporting and Advocating for LGBTQI+ youth in and out of the courtroom. I am Christina Lewis, NACC staff attorney. I am so excited to welcome today's presenters, Tamara Alexanian, a Skadden Fellow at the Children's Law Center of California, Danielle Danny King, the Senior Youth Policy Counsel at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, Gina Payne, peer advocate, and Daniel Biswano, entrepreneur. Please use the chat to interact with our presenters and with each other. However, if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. And now I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name again is Danielle Danny King. I currently advocate for LGBTQ youth through policy, advocacy, and community engagement at National Center for Lesbian Rights. Prior to being at NCLR, I used to work at the Legal Aid Society in New York, where initially I represented young folks in abuse and neglect cases in family court in Manhattan and also in Queens. And thereafter, I moved to Legal Aid's Community Justice Unit, where I represented youth and also adults who were a part of the different community organizations that we were a part of in collaborating. They were known as anti-violence, cure violence organizations, and we provided like direct legal support to folks on the ground in terms of like, know your rights trainings. During the time that I was there was when COVID hit. So a lot of trainings, information on what was happening during COVID. At that time was also when all the protests were happening in terms of police brutality. So did a lot of legal support for that and also surrenders as well, and representing folks in some family court proceedings as well. So I just want to thank you all for being here. Whenever I can, talk about LGBTQ youth issues, in the legal sphere, it always is important for me to think back about my experience as a LGBTQ youth in the foster care system. We're gonna have a couple of folks share with you some of their experiences in the child welfare and the juvenile justice systems. And I think that it's important, to start from a place of hearing from, the individuals who are directly impacted by our work. I know my experience in foster care was not the greatest. I would never go back to that time, couldn't pay me to go back. But I think that, when we think about this work, it's important to kind of know, especially for LGBTQ youth, that even if you don't think that you have clients who are LGBTQ, you probably do. And we'll go into the stats on that. But a lot of times clients are not always as comfortable to share who they are with their attorneys, and not just their LGBTQ status, a lot of times things that they might be going through mentally, physically. And so I think it's important for us to like have this conversation. And we have, some sections where we'll go into where you all can kind of practice. But I will pass it over to Tamar to introduce herself, and we'll get things going.
Thanks, Danny. My name is Tamara Alexanian. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Skadden Fellow at the Children's Law Center in LA. I represent, my project has been focused on representing LGBTQ foster youth in particular, accessing gender affirming care, name and gender marker changes, all of that good stuff. My fellowship is sadly coming to an end shortly, so I will be at the Youth Law Center soon. But this is the work that I've been doing in my fellowship. A lot of the case examples and things that I'll talk about have been things that I've been able to glean from the work that I've been doing in this area. So I'll kind of give some California examples since that's where I've been practicing, but that's kind of how I came into this work. And then before my Skadden Fellowship, I was representing youth and parents at University of Michigan's child welfare clinic, and also the appellate clinic, representing parents on termination of parental rights proceedings. So that's kind of my background there. And we will, like Danny said, jump to some questions with our folks with lived experience to center those voices.
So Daniel and Gina, thank you for being here today to talk to us. And I guess we'll start with you, Gina. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal experiences before encountering the child welfare system? I don't know if you were also in foster care or the juvenile justice system, whichever ones you encountered.
Yes, so I was in the foster care system in Northern California. I entered when I was 11 years old, and I was gratefully only in the system for about 1.5 years before I was allowed to move in with my sister. She gained custody of me. It was one of those situations. I never saw myself being in the child welfare system, simply because I think the dynamics of my family was something that was very typical for my neighborhood. I think there are a lot of people who went through the things that I went through. They just didn't get swept up into the court systems the way I did, but that is because my older siblings had experience in the child welfare system as well, because my biological mother did have a drug addiction. So I think that's what got me swept up, because I do feel like there are so many people I grew up with who had similar experiences, who didn't have to go through the trauma of going to court and having a judge make decisions for whether you can stay with family or whether you cannot stay with family, you have to stay with strangers. And I say that really impacted me simply because before the child welfare system, my mother had removed us from our family and I was already isolated. I will say I'm one of those cases where I wasn't coded for poverty or neglect. It was truly a situation where I should have been removed. And because of what was going on beforehand, I already had a strained relationship with my family. So going through the child welfare system really just further exacerbated that. And then even coming back and having a relationship with my sister, it became this whole thing of trying to get to know my family again. I feel like I had a very typical Black Christian family. And if you have any questions about how that correlates with an LGBTQ client, that'll let you know something. So I really feel like it really impacted me, because I never felt like I had somebody I could go to specifically about stuff when I was becoming to question my own identity. I felt like I wasn't involved in the family. I got back around. I'm like, oh, but we're going to church and I hear what the Lord say, so maybe I shouldn't. It really caused a lot of trauma within me, and whether or not I should even question that, because I had real life issues that I was going through in terms of homelessness and stuff like that. So it really impacted my life a lot in terms of, it never gave me any clear footing of where I could land and where I could focus on in my life.
Did you want me to answer the question now? Okay. Actually, can you repeat it? Just so I have everything. You're on mute.
Danny, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that technology. Yes, Daniel. So if you could talk a little bit about like your experience before entering or encountering, child welfare system, juvenile justice system, like what that was like for you before you encountered the system, so they could get to know a little bit about you before you were impacted by these systems.
Okay. So, as far as the foster care system, I couldn't really tell you, because I was taken away as a baby, and then I was reunified like around 3 or 4 years old with my family. But before the juvenile justice system, I don't know, it was just chaotic is what I could say. There was abuse, there was, drug abuse, and just the constant cycle of pain and torment and struggle. and poverty ultimately. You know, the earliest memories I have are of my mom being beat up, you know, by her boyfriend, and me having to, you know, jump on in her arms to protect her from getting hit, and things like that, you know. And as I got older, I didn't realize that this wasn't normal. I thought it was normal to live this way. I thought it was normal to live in a 1-bedroom apartment with 6 people and them smoking meth in the living room while I'm in the bedroom watching cartoons. And that was normal for me. So when I turned 12, like, the shift changed in me, and all of the turmoil that I went through started to surface because I started to realize that it wasn't normal. I started to be exposed to other people's families and, you know, other ways of living and things of that nature. And on top of that, I struggled internally with my sexuality. You know, at 12 years old, you know, life really hit me. I try to hang myself because I didn't know what these feelings inside me were. And much like Gina, you know, I grew up in a Latino Catholic family and a gang family on top of that. And, you know, I was always taught that, you know, liking other men was a sin. I thought I had a curse or a demon inside me. You know, so I acted out according to that. You know, obviously I'm still here. I didn't kill myself. But I slowly progressed in killing myself by using drugs and fighting and doing all of that. And around that age is the first time I got incarcerated as well. And, you know, I was put in jail cells with a lot older people that had murder charges and things of this nature. And I couldn't navigate that because I was always internally just a sweet, soft, feminine boy. And I had to turn into the monster that society said that I was ultimately to survive. And yeah.
So both of you kind of in the first question, like talked a little bit also about like your experiences, like encountering these systems. Was there more that you wanted to share about like what it was like for you, like being involved in these systems? And Gina, I'll go back to you again.
Yeah, I'll say that I went through foster care in Northern California, so I was not represented by the organization I work out now. It's something I think sometimes my colleagues are kind of shocked about. My case was open from 11 to 17, and I talked to my lawyer one time in that entire span of my case, and it was something that was a real struggle for me. And it was something that I thought was normal. It's a reason why I'm still at the organization I'm at now, to find that there are attorneys who see a value in at least talking once every 6 months in between hearings. I couldn't even get that. And so it was something that I do feel like I normalize my time being wasted. I normalize not feeling a value for my own life because I'm missing school. My sister's missing work, which means we're missing money to be able to sit here in a court all day. We're there at 8, the judge tells us around 2, oh, you can go home. We just continued it for another 6 months. It really prevented me from seeing a value in myself, because these systems, who in society we boast up to be so important for us, and they are the ones who know better and are making all the accurate decisions for me, they really wasted my time and they didn't value me. The only time I would interact with them was when I would do something wrong, when I would leave placement, or me and my sister would get into it. And so then, as most children do, you learn that that's a form of getting the attention you want. So you start getting in a little bit more trouble. I was always smart enough to know, stop getting in trouble before you turn 18, because I didn't want to go to jail at 18. And that was not for me. But it really caused for me to not value myself. And it's something, even with the clients I work with today, I have to tell them, you know, it's not something like case is going to close at 18 or 21 and all your issues are going to be resolved. It's something that I really wish that the judges and the attorneys I worked with understood that the decisions they made had such a lasting impact on my life. It really made me restructure the way I saw family, the way I saw myself as I became an adult. And so it's really putting that care into it. There's sometimes I feel like attorneys, and I know it's hard. I tell my attorneys that we work with all the time, I know you have over hundreds of clients. So it can be really hard to give that client that attention. But for you, it can be a file, but for us, it's a life. That is our literal lives that you're dealing with. So if that's one thing I wish that could be more part of the child welfare system, is having that patience and that care. And I know it's hard. I struggle with my clients as well, finding that balance between my self-care and doing the job. But it's one of those things, if we join this field, it's something that we have to be prepared for. So I really wish that I had gotten that patience and that care that I should have gotten in the child welfare system.
I don't know. I mean, I think we all know how messed up the system is. And if we don't, like, caging children, it says it all. You know, for me, I don't know. I still struggle with a lot of the turmoil that was caused by being incarcerated. You know, socially, you know, it's hard for me to develop healthy relationships because I have this like thing inside me where I feel like I can't trust anyone, or everybody's gonna leave, or things are transactional. You know, and for me, it was always about being in survival mode while I was incarcerated. It was about getting the next meal or the phone call or whatever it was to help sustain life while I was incarcerated. And the way that boils over now is I have 6 jobs. You know, I go to school, I'm trying to do acting and all this stuff, but none of those things, like, for the most part, I don't have a deep passion for. Like, I don't wake up in the morning happy, you know, to do the things that I do. And I'm still trying to sort through that now at 27 years old. Still trying to figure out what I'm passionate about, how to navigate my social awkwardness, how to be able to, you know, be in a committed relationship and develop trust and not always think that people are going to leave. All of these things, like, have been embedded in me, you know, over the years of being incarcerated. And, you know, it takes years of embedding them and relearning and kind of rewiring the way I think. And it's one of the biggest struggles that I've ever faced. You know, being incarcerated was easy because all I had to do was focus on survival. Now I'm trying to focus on living, and the survival part of it is preventing me from doing that. And I can't tell you an answer. I can't tell you that I have it figured out or that it's okay, because I don't feel anywhere near where I want to be in my life. And yeah, I'm young, but you know what, the brain that I have and the capacity that I have, I should be way better off than I am now. And it's because of the crutches and the shackles that are embedded now in my soul, in my mind, because of being incarcerated, that I have to sort through those. I have to be able to heal and things of that nature. And on top of that, we have traumas that go on out here, you know, being formerly incarcerated, being, you know, system impacted individuals. You know, for many years, I couldn't even get a job at Ross, you know, and that was hard. You know, that was hard to know that my worth was dependent on what you said, Gina, a file or a number, you know, and just relearning that and you know, thinking that I am worth more, you know, and just learning how to love myself enough to not let those shackles hold me back anymore, has been one of the biggest struggles of navigating the system, the emotional impact that it causes, you know, and the time that it takes away from us to be able to develop those skills like we're supposed to as a child, as a teenager, you know. And I didn't get any of that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you both brought, you know, this up about the lasting effects, like the trauma from being involved in these systems, the way it affects your life. Like, even as like an adult now and an attorney who's like practicing and doing this work, like me being in foster care, like it like comes up every day. Like, it has affected all aspects of my life. Like, even through being an attorney, I'd moved more times than my age, always, even when I got into my 30s, like, because I was just used to like moving and bouncing around and like not having like that, you know, not feeling like there was home. Like, I always felt like there was, you know, something could happen. I can't trust anything, because being in the system, I did bounce around a lot. Like, in 4 years, living in like 8 different foster homes, and about like 10 or 11 the time I was in, and I went away to college. So like, it was a short amount of time. Like, I would be at places sometimes 4 months, sometimes 6 months. And so like, people don't really understand, and not just like, you know, I think this is more for attorneys to hear, but people who don't know much about the child welfare system, like, you know, they don't really know the day-to-day harms that are occurring. But even as attorneys, when you practice, like, you're representing someone for that moment in time, but there's so much that happens thereafter, and the effects of what you were able to do or what you weren't able to do definitely, like, trickles down. And I was never able to live with my brother when I was in foster care, so it was very hard trying to, like, live anywhere and find stability where I felt like my other half wasn't there. And so I think it's definitely important for the folks that are tuning in now to kind of know, like, that this does have a lasting impact. Like, this is very, very important work, and to not, like, take light of that. So thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to next kind of transition into how your LGBTQ identity, however you want to, share that, may have impacted your experiences involved in these systems. Yeah, and I'll jump back to you, Gina.
So for me, it was very interesting because I feel like I'm someone who my sexuality isn't apparent when you look at me. So I was treated as if things that I was feeling inside weren't a thing, which caused me to hear some biases that I don't think people would have admitted to me had they known how I truly identified. And it also caused me to further question myself. I would overhear conversations between social workers about other kids and them being gay, and hearing that conversation is like, oh, well, I'm definitely not going to disclose to you how I'm feeling about myself because you've already established a boundary with me that this is how you feel. And it also made it hard for me to, even while I was questioning and trying to figure out if, very much like Daniel said, when you grow up in those traditional households, you really do think you're a sin and, you're cursed or something like that. So I'm having all this turmoil, feeling like I'm the odd one out. There's not a lot of queer people in my family. So I'm like, I can't come back. I'm damaged goods because I'm biologically belonging to my mother, who is like that one in the family. I went through foster care and I'm gonna come back gay. This is just too much for the family to take all at once. And at the same time, I'm dealing with making sure I have stable housing and I have food and I have clothing to take care of. And it's like, you're not meeting my basic needs. So I definitely can't trust you enough to even talk about something that I'm questioning if you can't even meet these basic needs. So it really impacted me because I feel like it thwarted me in my romantic progress, like in my development romantically. Even when I went away to college, I specifically moved to LA to get away from everything. And it was still such ingrained in my brain that even in college, I didn't feel like I could be who I wanted to be, because I'm like, what if it gets back? The Bay Area is so small. I was just so worried that I would just be able to freely be myself and it would come back to my family and it would be an embarrassment. I'm just turned 31 on Saturday, and it took like 4 or 5 years ago for me to finally accept who I was for myself. So, and I can say that it had a lot to do with the things that I overheard attorneys say, things I overheard my social workers say, including things I overheard my family say when I came back around after getting out of foster care. I just really felt like I couldn't be a bisexual woman. It was not allowed. I was confused. I was definitely promiscuous because I just was trying to sleep with everybody. So I just wasn't allowed to be myself. And it all stemmed from things that I don't even think it was conscious to them that what they were doing was really harming me. And so that's something I would like people to take away. You can't always see people's sexuality. And I know sometimes our speech is very gendered, and it's so easy when you're talking to a young lady to ask, oh, you got a boyfriend? If you're talking to a young man, oh, do you have a girlfriend? I know it's so easy to let that slip off, but if you could just, that's one thing with our field as lawyers, the law is constantly changing. So it's a continuous education thing. This is one of those things you have to be in continuous education about, because it really, it does change, and it really can impact your client, and like Daniel was saying, when you're in survival mode, I'm already feeling like that's a small thing. And it's not, it really became a huge thing as it became an adult. But because of what I was hearing everybody saying, I allowed it to be such a small thing and allowed myself to focus solely on survival. So please just be patient with yourself and with your clients, and just really be mindful with what you say to your clients, because it can really have, words are really powerful.
Ditto. I don't know. I guess this is a deep one for me because, like for a long time, when I first came out, I would wear my gayness on my sleeve. And I just remember, and it resonates with me until this day, but I remember like a counselor, I was in like rehab for a DUI a long time ago. And I remember she told me that my sexual preference isn't my personality. It isn't who I am. And, for a long time, I struggled with that because, I still think, it's a piece of me. The femininity of me being a gay man is part of my personality, but my sexual preference isn't. And that's something that I had to learn, and a lot of people like in my community, I don't know, they're unaccepting, they're not, you know, like pro LGBTQ, like during Pride Month, you see everybody with the flags and then everything just disappears after that. And for me, I'm not there yet. I still struggle with my sexual identity and my femininity. I struggle with the fact that I like men, and I struggle with the fact that, I can't even go down the street and hold my partner's hand without feeling a sense of unease. I can't be, at the gym and give them a peck on the cheek because I want to, because I'll feel a sense of unease. But then you look at a cisgender heterosexual couple, and that's not the case. You're not going to think twice about it. And every day I struggle with my sexuality. Sorry. And it's just hard because people could take away our rights at any moment. So I don't know. That's it. Sorry, I got emotional.
It's okay to be emotional. It's definitely okay. Like, especially in these times, things are very stressful. But just, living life when you're a minority, when you're other, life is hard. So, thank you for, being vulnerable and, being honest with us. I know that wasn't easy. The last thing that I wanted to just get into, and I feel bad jumping into this right after. Is there any like tips or advice that you would give for professionals? Most of the folks here are attorneys that work in this field. Some may also be, social workers or other support staff that work in this field, that work with youth who go through the child welfare system, juvenile justice system. Is there any advice that you would give for them to like better serve LGBTQ youth of color in general? Like, what advice would you like give if you could look back about those experiences now? And Gina, we'll go back to you.
Oh, sorry, you made me cry there. You had me thinking about my partner. Okay. Oh, that's such a real thing. Some advice that I would like to give, like I said before, just really be in that continuous education stage of learning to work on your speech, making sure it's not so gendered and assuming every male client has a girlfriend, every young lady client has a boyfriend, being mindful of that. Also, even outside of your clients, I think it's really beneficial to practice these even with the people in your life. Like we said before, there are people who identify as LGBTQIA that you wouldn't even know. I personally think the bisexual community is way bigger than people know. Like, I know that I think I'm one of the few people who are out at my office, but I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not. It's just one of those things, and just remember that sexuality doesn't have a look. And even if you see someone who you think is, that it couldn't even be a sexuality thing. So I just want people to practice lack of judgment, coming with an open mind, and ask questions, and ask them appropriately. Don't just come up and ask your client if you're gay. I think most of you guys should know that. But, create that relationship with your client to where you can ask those questions. Especially, I tell this to our attorneys all the time. Sometimes they're asked to ask questions about race, or they're scared to ask questions about their sexuality. But we have clients who are sexually assaulted, and we have to ask them about that. And that's our job. So hard conversations are already a part of, the job description. So just, work on forming those relationships and those bonds. That's going to come with working on not gendering your speech as much and just being open and forming those relationships so your clients feel open to come to you with stuff like that.
Yeah, sorry guys. I don't know why that got me so emotional, but and thank you for all the comments and messages. I've seen them. I just don't want to respond yet because out of respect. But for me, I don't know. I guess the biggest thing is just treating me like you would treat the next person, the next heterosexual cisgender person. And again, yeah, don't assume, you know, but give me the respect that I deserve as a human being, you know. Treat me like you would your sister or your brother. Because one thing I've noticed is that, you know, people will treat me all cool and fine. And then once they find out that I'm gay, it's like a switch flips and it's like, you know, cold shoulder, ignored, you know, disrespected and things of that nature. And I never changed in between the process of you having conversation with me and becoming my friend to you finding out that I'm gay. I was always the same version of me. So just remembering that we're all human, we all feel, we all bleed, we all cry. And it shouldn't really matter, you know, what our sexual preference is or our identity or any of that. As long as we're a good person, that's all that matters, I think.
Thank you both so much. And I know you can see from the chat that people are really valuing like you all sharing your experiences and your stories. So thank you so much for that. I will note that Daniel and Gina won't be here for the entire presentation, but we will take a moment for folks who have questions. I did see one in the chat that I'm gonna try to like synthesize a little bit for sake of time. So earlier when you all were talking about the abuse you may have experienced or the trauma that you went through and not really knowing that that wasn't okay, how would you like give advice to, you know, attorneys, social workers, people working in the field on how to have those conversations with their clients that may not be at the point yet where they don't know that like some of those things that they've went through are, you know, not what a, you know, loving environment, you know, should look like?
So something I do now in the work that I do as a peer advocate is it always helps to repeat the conversation back to them. Sometimes I feel like my clients do not hear themselves because I know that was me. I didn't really understand what I was saying. And then it also helps to sometimes correlate it to someone who's not in their family. So for example, when I have a client who's telling me about an abusive relationship they're in, that their mother is physically abusing them, you know, I'll ask them, I was like, didn't you say, I was like, so your mom punched you in the face because you dropped something on the floor? And then as soon as I say it, they're like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. I'm like, would you tolerate it if I punched you in the face because you dropped this pen? And you can see the shift. It's one of those, you really don't think about it in a different context because it is your normal reality. And so what's helped to me is helping them to see you wouldn't tolerate this from other people. We're tolerating it because, you know, we are told, oh, it's family. We can't help who family is. And that's just the way things are. Or because especially when it's your parent, it took me a long time to understand that the abuse my mother was giving me wasn't normal because I'm like, well, that's my mom. To me, that was just, everybody's mom was different. That's just how mine was. It took a while for me to understand that what I was dealing with wasn't normal. And it did help with people asking me like, well, would you tolerate that for me? Why would you tolerate that from her? And I would say, well, it's different because she's my mom. She's like, they're like, exactly. It is different because she should really not do that because of X, Y, and Z. So sometimes they don't understand the dynamics of other families because that's the only family that they know. So it also helps exposing them to different groups. If you know any mentorship programs or anything like that, or different groups that you can expose them to that will allow them to see how different families operate, that really, really helps as well. Because if it's their normal, they won't be able to see anything different. They won't have anything to compare it to. So that's just something that I use.
Yeah, again, ditto. For me, that the second part of what Gina said is what I was going for, but ultimately the exposure to, something different. I could go through all the trainings, the therapies, everything, when I was a kid, and none of it helped. But what helped me was being in an environment that was healthy and taught me what healthy looks like. It was being around people that supported me regardless. It was being held accountable, for the actions that weren't right, but also being held accountable for the ones that were, you know, like all of those things helped me and continue to help me. Community is one of the biggest things for me. When I started to, want to learn more about my femininity and my gayness and all of that, I sought out community in the gay world, and it was ballroom, and they exposed me to what, you know I don't know how to explain it, what the top tier people of the gay community look like and what it looks like to be invested in yourself enough to not care what anybody else thinks, and things like that. Being exposed to, healthy people that accept and love themselves and, could show me how to do the same thing are ultimately what empowered me. All the other stuff never did. Going to acting class, going to dancing, going to football games, whatever it was, driving through Beverly Hills where all the mansions are and just seeing how beautiful it is and knowing that I could get there one day. All of these things helped me to learn how to elevate myself. And it gave me inspiration and drive to do so, to know that I can do it, that I'm worth it, that the 4 square blocks of my hood aren't just me. There's so much more to the world than what it is. And being able to have those opportunities, especially when you come from the hood, foster care, juvenile justice, whatever it is, we don't have those opportunities a lot. We don't have the opportunities to fly out to Puerto Rico or go to Mexico or wherever it is, Europe, any of these places, and they're all places that have helped me grow and expose me to what it looks like to, have privilege. I never even knew I had privilege until I went to Puerto Rico, but now I'm noticing it, and then I'm like, okay, well, how can I use my own privilege to help the people that are less fortunate than even me, and things like that. Being in my square couple blocks of LA, it doesn't show me a lot.
Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences. And I was going to say, I don't know when you're jumping off, but yeah, feel free to stay on as long as you need. I didn't see any questions, any other further questions in the chat. So I will let you all go from here. But I'll give it one more moment. Did anyone have any question that they didn't get to ask? We will have a general Q&A at the end, but this is specifically for questions for Gina or Daniel. So just give 1 second to see if anyone mentioned anything. Someone mentioned, how can we help eliminate the preaching to the choir bit? LGBTQ and child welfare, not really sure if you all have a response for that.
Good question, I'll be quite honest. If you could rephrase it, or if you could can they come off mute and ask it?
I'm not sure the attendees can, they can put it in the.
Okay, I feel like most people we talk about these issues agree with us. How do we convince those people who are actually contributing to the hate? I guess I'll jump in. There's no convincing them. Like I always say, the yin and the yang of this world, with the good, you always have the bad, but just being able to hold on to your light and share it with the world, I think is the most important. And realizing that you'll never be able to convince them, and just show them by actions. And if they are not those kind of people, then they'll come around when they see your actions and you live in your full truth. Even me, you know, putting on heels and going to dance, like inspire people. Because what cholo with tattoos do you see dancing in heels? None. So just be yourself, you know.
Ditto, ditto. I firmly agree with that. It's really hard to change the human mind, and I don't think it's something that can easily be done. I think if that's something that's in their heart, I don't know how to show my humanity. I don't know how to force someone to see me as a human being. So that's a really hard task. I think if we knew the answer to that, we would have world peace. Truthfully.
Yeah. And I will say later in the presentation, we will be going over kind of like SOGI conversations. I see folks asking, and this is kind of like follow up to this question. So we will have a little bit of practice on ways that you can talk to clients about these issues. But thank you so much, Daniel and Gina. Really appreciate you. And I know the folks, even just from what people shared in the chat, appreciated having you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. So sorry, I'm trying to fill my face before I gotta go to work.
It's okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're gonna transition now. Before we get into the rest of the presentation, we have some poll questions for you. So we're gonna transition into that now. Just gonna wait for the.
We have question 1 pop up. There it is. So if you can just take a quick moment to answer the question that's on your screens.
Don't worry if you're not sure, get it right. We're gonna go over it.
Can everyone see the results? I can't tell what people can see and what people can't see. Danny, can you see what I see?
Yeah, I'm not sure that folks could see the results.
They can.
Can see it?
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
They're all
So we
changing
have
Zoom around, so I don't
I know, I'm
remember
like,
seeing
this is
results
what I
before.
see. So we had 60% say 2 to 4 years old, 32% who said 5 to 7, and then 8% who said 8 to 10. And again, we'll go over the answers in a second. Can we have question 2 pop up, please? Okay, so we have children typically begin to become aware of their sexual orientation around what age? 53 of you said 8 years, 35 said 10 years, and then 12% said 12 years. Again, we'll go over answers in a second. And can we have poll question number 3 pop up, please? Okay, great. So what percentage of youth in foster care are LGBTQ? We have 16% who think it's 10.7%, We have 43% who think it's 30.4%, excuse me, and 41% think it's 20.5%. So we are going to look at the answers really quickly. I think we had the majority answer correctly on, was it all of them, Danny? Or did we miss do number 2?
The second question was, I think more folks answered for 8 years old.
A little bit younger. Okay,
But
great. So the correct answers are 2 to 4 years for when children typically begin to become aware of their gender identity. And we have the sources below if anyone has kind of questions or wants to do a little bit of further reading. Children typically begin to become aware of their sexual orientation around 10 years old, and then 30.4% of youth in foster care identify as LGBTQ+. Danny, I'll pass it back to you.
And you all, if you don't have the slide materials yet, after the presentation, you'll have access to the slide with we try to have hyperlinks to a lot of different resources on the slides itself, so you can refer back to it. So I just want to start off, and we'll go through a little bit quickly because you gave a little extra time for the speakers earlier. So LGBT youth represent 29%, and transgender youth represent 4% of the overall youth who are homeless in the US. And when we talk about this work, we like foster youth and runaway homeless youth experiences and statistics are important because the issues of family acceptance, a lot of young folks, even some who are, in my experience from working with LGBTQ drop-in centers, and even folks who are in foster care, when they're not in a supportive home, sometimes they still go to runaway homeless youth centers, drop-in centers. And so for LGBTQ youth, like knowing the amount of folks who are homeless in addition to foster care is so critical. LGBT youth make up 30.4%, as you know. Most of those youth are youth of color. We could spend whole slides talking about intersectionality, and I definitely do a lot of presentations on that. But when you think about the LGBTQ youth that you are working with, majority of them are also youth of color. And so, and when it comes to racism, when it comes to LGBTQ status, a lot of those issues are intertwined. And so it's definitely very important when you think about this work, that you understand that a lot of the youth that you encounter have dual identities. In terms of, I like to mention this, even though we're not going to get so much into the issues of youth with disabilities, that could be a whole presentation. But I bring this up with anyone who is working with young folks that are dealing with the child welfare system. 13 to 52%, it varies depending on the state. That's why there's such a wide gap. Show that foster youth are on some sort of psychotropic medication, in comparison to research that shows that 4% of youth who have never been in the foster care system are receiving psychotropic medication. So there's definitely a lot of, and there's other research and work to talk a lot about this issue, but the overuse of medication for foster youth, the overdiagnosing of mental health illnesses and behaviors that are part of normal youth development when you're in foster care, a lot of times get noted as, you're the bad kid, we need to calm you down. And also, I know in New York, I don't know as much about some of the foster care boarding rates in other states, but the boarding rates vary for 3 tiers, and folks who have youth with disabilities a lot of times can go into the 2nd or 3rd tier, where the amount that they're getting for the child is a lot different. The structure can look different in every state, but there's similar systems. And so it's important to kind of be aware that this also comes up, and I know in foster homes I lived in, I saw the abuse of this, and getting someone diagnosed so that you can get a higher boarding rate, and this stuff does happen. In the US, 1 in 9 Black youth and 1 in 20 Latinx youth have an incarcerated parent. I'm sure there's many folks here who work with young folks who have one or both of their parents who are incarcerated. And because of this, a lot of times it may not be the reason why they encounter the child welfare system, but they're definitely more likely to encounter the child welfare system because of this. And when it comes to, you know, the hindrance of reunification, parents being incarcerated definitely makes reunification harder. And I definitely think that this, again, could be a whole presentation about how courts do not do a good job communicating with parents when they're incarcerated, whether that's criminal or immigration, and keeping that contact with the child. And in the US, half of Black children and half of Native American children at some point in their lifetime would have encountered the child welfare system in comparison to like just under a quarter of white children. And so, you know, I know a lot of us heard of the, you know, recent ICWA decision, which we were glad ICWA was upheld. But the stats for Black and Native American children are very similar in terms of like the amount of encountering of the child welfare system for decades. And there hasn't really been a shift, even though there's been, you know, different policy changes in many states. In my role, I get to work with folks, you know, across the country, and there's a lot of things that are being done to try to address some of the disparities, but this statistic still remains that Black youth and Native youth are overly encountering the foster care system more than any other youth. So, Tamara, you want to jump into? We're just going to give
Yeah, we're just going to go super quick. But we wanted to talk about the ways that we have seen LGBTQ issues kind of crop up on cases, and the ways that it affects our clients, and the ways that it affects our jobs, and the ways that we need to advocate. My example that, again, I will try and keep it short and sweet. I have a trans young man that I represent, and he is dual status involved in the juvenile justice system and the dependency system. And I think partially because of the dual status piece, there's a lot of moving pieces that are always happening in his case. And the laws in California where I practice are very good, but I have noticed on his case, a lot of those laws are not always being followed, right? So like we have laws about how youth in foster care have a right to be referred to by their chosen name and pronouns. And that's something that I can't always make all the probation officers follow. Or, you know, we have parents objecting to legally changing the child's name and gender marker or gender affirming care things. Coordinating between the two court systems. If gender affirming care is okayed by one judge on the probation side, having, you know, matching court orders in the dependency system, coordinating to make sure that the medications are actually happening, that the child is transported to necessary medical appointments. There's kind of just, it's not always like this on all cases, right? Some LGBTQ youth, you know, they identify as LGBTQ, and that's not a piece of the case that is constantly needing like litigation assistance and court orders and things like that. But this is a case where it is often coming up and is really deeply affecting the client and is impacting his relationship with his family, with his mentors, where he's living, experiencing a lot of bias in group home settings. And so I bring that up because it's not ever just like, oh, it's just an issue of people not using pronouns, or it's just this. There's always a lot of different pieces revolving for some of the cases that see this.
Yeah, and you know, I had many examples of representing LGBTQ clients when I did trial work in New York, but one client in particular that I represented, the case was going on for years, and the client had already been separated from their mom in foster care, living with a non-biological foster parent, not related to them. And by the time I inherited the case, their mother had done, you know, parenting, a number of different services and treatment, pretty much everything that the court had asked. And my client was about 14 at the time and had some visits with their mom, but since being in foster care, was visiting a little less, and actually, which I didn't always see in cases, ACS and the foster care agency was really pushing for my client and their mom to reunify and live together. And they didn't really understand why my client didn't want to do that. From all accounts, they didn't see any issues during the visits, but they didn't really understand why my client was like not willing to try to live with their mom at this, you know, stage in the case. And it turned out that my client was LGBTQ. And that was something that like the prior attorney before me did not know. But in speaking with my client and building a rapport, I found out that that was the reason why my client did not want to reunify with their mom, and the reason why they, you know, not necessarily wanted to visit less, but, you know, they definitely were being a little bit more cautious with like the, you know, contact they had with their mom, you know, how often they spoke to them on the phone, how often they visited, because they weren't out to their mom. And they knew that if they were home, that they would not be able to be themselves and be open and out. My client at that time was lucky to be living in a foster home that was supportive and affirming to them. And so my client wanted to continue to live there, but also didn't want to badmouth their mother because they knew that their mom had come a long way, but they were not out to their mom. And so we definitely had to, you know, like collaborate with like our social work team on staff and try to figure out a way where we were, you know, making sure that my client could, you know, still maybe go, you know, visit the mom overnight or spend some time and still build that relationship, which was important, but still advocate at the same time that my client should remain in the foster home that they were in. And I think sometimes in court, you know, it oftentimes you have to kind of toe the line with like, you don't want to bring certain things up that may be an issue later on down the line, as far as like mentioning that my client's parent might not, you know, be supportive or maybe homophobic. Like that's not what my client wanted me to do. They didn't want me to like shame their mom, but they also wanted to be somewhere where they were happy. And so we had to kind of navigate, you know, in the case when, you know, who to mention what to, and, you know, not bringing certain things in court, but I had to, you know, speak with the parent's attorney and kind of collaborate and kind of like in nonchalant ways, kind of let them know that there was something else going on, not that the mom was bad and she shouldn't feel that way, but, you know, there's things that are a little bit deeper, and, you know, try to get some services and try to get them to do family therapy, and, you know, increase their contact in certain ways, but not put my client in a position where they at that time felt kind of forced that they were going to have to go back with their mom when they just knew that it wasn't a supportive environment for them.
Danny, you set me up perfectly. So I'm going to talk quickly about confidentiality. It is a really wonderful and beautiful thing when your client trusts you enough to share about their identity and share about what their experiences are. And I think it's also especially important for clients of all ages. I think confidentiality is sometimes a hard thing to really understand, but especially for youth, when you've got a lot of players on your case, I find that it's important to make sure that they understand what your duty of confidentiality is to them and what that really means, and then differentiate who else on their case has different duties and responsibilities to them. So what you don't want to happen is you have a client who has come out to you or has told you something about, you know, they use a different name and pronouns and they want you to use those, but they only want you to use those, right? They're not out to their social worker. They're not out to foster family or whatever. And then you make the mistake of not knowing that or not asking that question, and you out them to people that they're not out to, right? Like you can be creating a dangerous situation for them. There's just so many things wrong. Don't do that. That, you know, can like be really harmful to your client, to your relationship with your client. So I always try and go into these conversations, making sure that, and sometimes revisiting the conversation, right? So I know we talked about this last time. I want to check in with you. Last time you said that you aren't out at school and I need to contact your school for, your ed rights stuff. This is the name and pronouns I use for you at school, right? And just double checking. And if they're going into a new sort of environment, checking in with them there, and being like, hey, you're going to a new foster home. Are you comfortable being out at your foster home? If not, great. I won't tell folks. Also making sure if you have multiple, like we have peer advocates, Gina Payne and I work at the same organization, making sure that they understand what your relationship is with folks within your organization. Sometimes I get questions about like, well, did you tell your supervisor? Did you tell the peer advocate? So explaining what confidentiality means within the folks on your team, and then also explaining what like social workers' duties are. I sometimes have clients who are like, well, my social worker asked the same questions you asked, so I told them, but I thought they wouldn't tell anyone. And then it shows up in reports, right? And then they're outed to the judge. They're outed to folks that they don't want to be outed to. So all that to say, confidentiality is really important, and making sure that you're revisiting that conversation, you're being very mindful of those conversations, taking notes on and reminding yourself of, this is what I do in this setting. These are the folks I can talk to about this. This is the permission I have for my client, so that you don't get in a bad situation. You don't put your client in a bad situation.
And it's no different, and Gina kind of talked about this earlier, it comes up in a lot of different ways. If your client tells you that they were sexually assaulted when they were in the system, or they were harmed by someone, you should be having these conversations, because not everything that the client is comfortable sharing with you is something that they would like the court to know, that they would like once it comes up in court, their parents' attorneys will, find out and can tell their parents. Their parents might be in the courtroom if certain things are raised. So it's important whenever you're talking to clients to kind of know what information they're telling you is okay for you to discuss in court and what's not. Not just LGBTQ status. When I practiced, I used to have a side of my interview sheet that was like all the information my client was telling me and what's okay for the judge to know. And I would literally write okay to tell and make sure that was clear to them, because I think it's important, in terms of like when you're representing young folks, they're no different than if you're representing adults. And you need to make sure that you're protecting your client's confidentiality as an attorney and having that conversation with them and knowing what's okay. And obviously, depending on their age, that conversation may be a little bit different in nuance and maybe a little bit harder to have. But even most young kids know what are you okay, me saying to people that from what you told me, and what is not okay, what's okay to tell and what's not okay to tell. Even young kids 4 or 5 years old know what a secret is. But kids who are of traditional cognitive development, it can vary obviously if they have cognitive difficulties, but most kids know what secrets are, what is to keep things to yourself, what is okay to share. And so I think it's important to think about that in the context of like everything that a client may tell to you, just as you would if you were representing an adult in any kind of legal matter.
Thanks, Danny. So I know we just, there were some questions in the chat. This is going to kind of jumpstart this conversation. The column on the left is things that maybe are less socially acceptable, or things that maybe were terms that have now kind of evolved. Anytime I start this conversation, I usually say like, language changes. My favorite example is the word selfie. Like when I first said the word selfie to my grandmother, she was like, what is that word that you just said? Language changes, and this is also something that changes. The other caveat that I always provide is you should always follow the direction of your client. So if your client is using words that are on the left side of this column, right? And there are words that are maybe less socially acceptable or that have changed, but your client uses that language to describe themselves and their experiences. It is very important that you mirror their language, because they are the experts of their lives and their bodies and themselves. and you should follow their direction. If you are like starting from scratch with a conversation or are having kind of general conversations, I encourage you all to look to the column on the right for words and language that I recommend. So we'll go through it quickly. Preferred pronouns on the left, pronouns on the right. I know a lot of folks, the word preferred kind of suggests that it's just a preference, which they're just pronouns. It is just fewer words to say, even better than anything else. On the left, biologically male, biologically female, genetically female, born a boy or born a girl. Assigned male or female at birth, or designated male or female at birth. A lot of times I see on documents, actually for medical providers, often AMAB or AFAB, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. Sex change, pre-op, post-op on the left side, and transition is a good word to use on the right. Sexual preference, gay lifestyle, homosexual lifestyle on the left. Sexual orientation is a good term. And then this I've actually been seeing a lot of recently, transgender used as a noun. Trans person, transgender person, trans being used as an adjective is a more appropriate way to reference that. Just a couple more. Female, male, kind of actually in the same vein. Female or male being used as a noun. Female or male as an adjective is better. Female client, male client. Not transgender. The term you're likely looking for is cisgender, which I think one of our, either Gina or Daniel actually already said earlier today. And then do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, which Gina also touched on? Do you have a partner? Do you have a significant other? Do you like anyone? You know, just a non-gendered kind of version of that. And then opposite gender, I actually just saw a sign at juvenile hall that said opposite gender, and I was frustrated. There are lots of genders. There are not just two. So opposite suggests that there are two. I would try other gender, another gender, a different gender. I think those are more inclusive terms that we can use. Okay, so we are going to give us all a chance to practice. I know this was something that that someone had asked about in the chat. So how would you ask your client about their pronouns in a client interview? If you can just put some ideas that you have in the chat, and then Danny and I can kind of share some things that we have done with clients. These are great. I'm going to start reading some of these out. What are your pronouns? Great. My pronouns are she, her. What are yours? I think that's great. That's something I use a lot. Start with yourself. Introduce yourself with your pronouns. What would you like me to call you? That's a great one. I have some clients who don't want to share pronouns, don't have pronouns, are still thinking about what pronouns they want to use. So what would you like me to call you encourages them to say their pronouns, especially if you've already shared yours, or they can tell you a nickname, or they can say, you know, my name is Elizabeth, call me Lizzie. And that's a great tool that I use in facilitation, especially. I think we have a lot of, what would you like for me to use when we talk? That's great. These are really wonderful. The other one that I often have to jumpstart the conversation is there are usually pronouns in the reports that I receive by the time a case comes to us. And so sometimes I will say to the client, this is the name and these are the pronouns, or these are the words that they're using to describe you in the report. I want to check in with you. Are those comfortable for you? Are those the ones that I should use for you? And that can be helpful. Danny, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think you guys did a great job in the comments to talk. There's like many ways to have this conversation, right? And I see the last comment asking if they know what it is. That's, you know, you definitely can decide the order, which if you ask them and they're confused, you may need to, you know, break it down and explain to them, especially when they're younger. I usually, when I've had to explain it, to say, you know, there's many ways that someone can address you other than your name, and kind of explain to them that you know, if I were to address you in a respectful way, how would you want me, you know, to address you if I wasn't using your name? And then I would give them some of the examples. You know, some people say he, she, or they, or there's other, you know, other examples. How would you want me to address you if I wasn't using your name to address you? Because that's really what pronouns are, right? And some clients would say that, you know, they wanted just their name. And I'm kind of in that same like camp. I don't like pronouns as much, which is why I've used kind of all of them, he, she, they. I'm non-binary and trans. I don't really like the binary. But I think it's important to kind of have that conversation with clients. And when it comes to like taking that information down, because what's in your file is confidential, right? So I would put notes in my file about what their pronouns were, what they said to me at that time. And every time I would meet with them, I would ask them again, because it can, you know, it can change over time. They may, especially as childs are getting older, they may kind of understand that language a little bit more. Sometimes that leads into them discussing their gender identity with you, because they feel like it's a safe space. So I think that it's definitely like a nuanced question, but it's something that you don't just ask once and it's one and done. It should be a continuous conversation, you know, when you talk to your clients, to make sure that you're addressing them in the way that's most respectful to them.
Yeah, thanks so much for saying that, Danny. One phrase that I encourage our attorneys to use when they have questions about this is, last time we talked, you wanted me to use this name and these pronouns. Is that still okay? You don't want to, I never want you to come off as like you weren't paying attention, you know, like, oh, I don't know what your name and pronouns are. You want to demonstrate like, I know what they were. I'm asking not because I wasn't paying attention, but because I want to make sure that that's still right. And I want to be respectful of if those have changed. And I find that most clients are excited to be asked, like they understand that shows respect for them. Okay, we're going to do something similar with how would you ask your client about their gender identity and or sexual orientation in a client interview. So if you can put some stuff in the chat and I can read some of them out. Anyone have any ideas? Do we have any brave souls? I guess this is a good thing that we asked. Maybe, okay, I guess, oh, okay. Are you comfortable discussing? Okay, great. Thank you to the brave person who went first. Are there any other, I would ask if they're comfortable discussing how they identify or if they'd like to wait. Do we have a couple more brave souls who want to jump in? Okay, we're very excited about the CLE number. I will offer that, I mean, as the last conversation, age appropriate stuff, right? I find that sometimes younger clients aren't as familiar with what SOGI means, but sometimes older clients are. So you can, the conversation should always be age appropriate as everything working with kids. I think I often ask about, especially in the context of like reproductive health conversations, which I have with clients to make sure that they have the information that they need. Do you have a significant other? I often provide them with kind of handouts about what their rights are, knowing about, you know, age appropriate sex ed stuff and making sure that that is not just like heterosexual cisgender reproductive health information. Yes, I'm sorry. There, it looks like there's a few other folks who responded in the chat. You could ask if there's anything they want to tell you about their gender identity and sexual orientation. Okay, great. Danny, do you have any thoughts on ways to share?
And I'm also like looking at the questions. I did notice people jumped in a little bit quicker on the pronouns because it's going to be hard, right? So like when in terms of the question about age, that's why we started with the poll questions, because a lot of folks think that young folks are too young to start, kids are too young to ask these questions to at certain ages. But, as we showed in the poll questions, 2 to 4 years old is when you start thinking about your gender identity. 10 years old and these are on average, right? That doesn't mean that every child at that age, but on average, typically, studies have shown 2 to 4 years old is when you start knowing that the world is gendered and start figuring out and thinking about how you identify. And that happens very young, 2 to 4 years old. I know I started thinking about those things at, 4 or 5 years old. When it comes to sexual orientation, around 10 years old. And it's no different than, for their cisgender straight peers, when young kids start, thinking about they want to have any kind of significant other, I saw some of that in elementary school, but when you get to, junior high and high school, that's when people start figuring out when, who they date, who, they're attracted to, and they're still figuring those things, out. So it's no necessarily like right age that one is too young or not, but you kind of gauge with the client. And sometimes it's come up, organically, if there was things going on in the case. I had a client who had a particular issue where there were assumptions that was being made about them, which was kind of clear that it might have had to do with their LGBTQ status. Because another child in the foster home accused them of something. And so in that instance, I asked them outright, which a lot of times I kind of see how the conversation comes organically. But in that instance, I needed to know because it was kind of clear from the way the agency was handling the situation that it might have had something to do with my client's LGBTQ status. And so I asked my client, directly if they were LGBTQ, which they told me that they were bisexual. But also that wasn't the first question I asked my client, right? I had already interviewed with them previously. I had already built a rapport. I had already assisted them with something. So making sure that the client is comfortable when you have these conversations is important. It may not be the first thing that you necessarily ask, because as like Gina and Daniel talked about, they may come from families or communities where thinking about all the anti-trans laws and things in society now, if we really even have a society that's, really pro-LGBTQ is up for debate, but they may come from home situations and environments where it's not okay to disclose these things. And so when you ask, even if you are asking for a good reason to get to, know them, they may not know it's safe. So making sure that you build that comfort with them is important before you try to have these conversations. And that may mean if the first time you interview with them, they're very nervous, they're not really trusting, that's not the conversation to have with them at that time, because they're very hesitant talking to you about anything. But as you build rapport with them, when these kind of conversations come up, just like I've seen my colleagues ask about, if they had a boyfriend or girlfriend, which, like Tamar said, significant other, or, someone that you're, dating, using more neutral words. If you're comfortable asking that, then you should be comfortable asking these questions too, because it's about getting to know your client. Because a lot of times how they identify, the LGBTQ status is going to have an effect on like their interactions with their family, their interactions in the foster home, interactions in school. And so it's important for you to know this about them, because it is going to affect, your advocacy, whether it's providing like resources to them, support services, or, having this conversation so you can know that they're in a supportive and affirming environment. And there are clients that I had that their foster homes were supporting, and some of them were not. Clients that it was supportive at home and sometimes it wasn't. And so just as you're getting to know other things about them, it's important to know this too, and treat this as a conversation of, I'm just trying to get to know you and making sure that I know as much as I can so I could be your best advocate. And if they don't want to talk about it at that time, or they don't want to answer, or they choose not to, that's okay, because it may take time for them to build that trust.
I also want to get to Lisa just asked a question. Should I share my sexual orientation? This is a personal preference. Everyone's practice is different. I sometimes share my sexual orientation with clients, but not always. That's not something that I share out the gate. But if it is something that, kind of like Danny said, comes up organically or might be relevant for my client in some sort of way, it is something that I do share with them as necessary. Again, I don't share it as something of, I don't know, to like make it about myself or to, I don't make them feel pressured to share that with me necessarily though. So I take it on a kind of case-by-case example, and my policy is not to blanket share with all of my clients necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's important to know like the reason why you might be sharing that with them and making sure that the focus is on them. Like most of my clients didn't know I was a former foster youth, because I wanted to make sure that the attention wasn't on me, it was on them. And, some clients that were older, and I thought it made sense to kind of have that conversation with them, to talk about different advocacy and things that I may have done, and particularly from advocacy for me to be able to go away to school while I was in foster care. Like sometimes that may have come up, but like I tried not to share as much with clients because you can toe the line between like trying to make them feel comfortable sharing and then it becoming a conversation about you. So I think that, yeah, it's not a blanket thing, but I think you need to know the reason why you're bringing it up, and if it's necessary to have that conversation with them, which it oftentimes you don't necessarily need to. But for some clients, it may like make them feel more comfortable. They may tell you that all their friends are LGBTQ and they have a hard time like when they're around folks who aren't supportive and don't understand what they're going through. And so it may make sense at that time for you to mention like, I had similar struggles and so, it's kind of something you have to gauge, but the focus should always be on the client and if this is going to be beneficial for them.
Okay, I'm going to move us just a little quickly. There's so much to say and not enough time. I want to touch quickly. I saw a question in the chat, gender affirming care. I know this is going to be really state specific, and so I can't kind of give blanket things here, but it is really important that you know your state's laws. I know lots of states are doing their own thing right now, and also some states have passed some great laws protecting gender affirming care for kids. Colorado, Minnesota, California, New Mexico, maybe Michigan. There's some cool stuff going on in some states. It is not our jobs to be medical providers, right? Like there's a reason I didn't go to med school. I don't like medicine. Blood freaks me out. But it is my job to know what the laws are and to know what resources exist in my community for my clients. If they are interested in gender affirming care, I think it's my responsibility to know where I can refer them or, what places will be good for them to get good information. I think it also very quickly, we have to work well with medical providers to help in our court cases. So I often have to have medical providers provide testimony to the court, provide letters to the court that say like that the gender affirming care will be medically necessary for the youth, which is a term that courts, or at least our courts, often like need to hear. And that's not something that I can provide, right? Like I can't talk about what is like medically necessary. I need some medical expertise to talk about that. And I also find that bringing doctors into the conversation helps educate judges, helps kind of dismantle some counter arguments that I have heard from other kind of opposing counsel that kind of starts getting into the weeds of like myths and like biased myths that exist around gender affirming care. So that is generally what I recommend. I also do recommend that you are clear about timelines with your client. I have found that in the legal world, sometimes we're like, 6 months, 1 year, not that long. Clients don't have that same perception of what 6 months to a year is, right? And so if I'm working on a name and gender marker change for a client and I say, it's really fast to me and really fast to a client are really different things. And so I try and say, okay, it's going to take 2 weeks to get us on calendar to have the judge sign the first piece of paper. After that, we have to come back 6 weeks later, and then we have to have an argument. And then after that, it's going to be 8 months until Vital Records prints you a new birth certificate. And if anything happens to that birth certificate in the mail, it will take another 4 months to get you a new one. Because I think it, again, like our perception of quick and a youth's or like anyone else's non-legal perception of quick can be really different. And it's just really important that they are aware of what a timeline looks like so that they can plan their lives accordingly, right? Like if your client needs a birth certificate for something in 3 months and you don't talk about what a timeline looks like, they might end up kind of in a bind. So I just want to kind of put that out there really quickly.
Yeah, and you all will have access to the slides. I like to share when I do these presentations, because we hear so much about the LGBTQ bills that are out there. I like to share some of the more supportive LGBTQ plus bills and youth supporting bills. So I won't go through and read all of them. You have access to this. But in New York, there's coalitions that do LGBTQ advocacy days where even as a trial attorney, if it's something that you're interested in, you may have something probably in your jurisdiction if you're not in California or New York. If anyone's interested in being involved in some of this legislative stuff and you are in California or New York, let me know and I can get you added to those coalitions. But in New York, they recently just passed the Safe Haven for Trans Youth and Families Act for folks who are moving to other states because they're trying to access gender affirming care because they can't access it in their state. California already passed such law and a number of other states as well. In 2022, the Youth Bill of Rights in California for youth and juvenile facilities passed, which really enumerated the protections that young folks who are incarcerated have, including access to clothing, that gender specific clothing that they choose, access to gender affirming care, to be free from discrimination. A lot of the work I do deals with a lot of the intersectionalities. So a lot of the bills that we support aren't just, LGBTQ focused. They're focused on supporting youth who are involved in the child welfare system, juvenile justice system, and how to make things better for them. Personally, I would like to see a lot of these systems dismantled in the ways that they're operated. But until that can happen, trying to make sure that the environments are safe for them is important. In California right now, there's an affirming foster homes bill, SB 407, that's pending. In addition, AB 957, TGI Youth Empowerment Act relates to child custody and visitation proceedings that judges should take into account a parent's affirmation of a child's gender identity when they're thinking of best interests. So it doesn't require them to make any particular determination, but it's noting a little bit more outright in the law that that's something that should be considered when you're thinking of a child's best interest, because children who are not in affirming and supporting homes have higher suicide rates, have higher rates of running away. And so it's important that when you think about the well-being, and health of a child, that is something that is considered as well. So that's one of the bills that we're supporting, as well as, access for restrooms, single restrooms, non-gender restrooms, and education equality. They're starting SB 857, they're starting a LGBTQ task force to make sure that students and folks have kind of a seat at the table to talk about different issues that LGBTQ students face. So the list is here, the number's here. If you just Google the, California and the bill number, it'll come up, or New York and these bill numbers, it'll come up if you want to read the text. of these bills. Some of them are still pending for either next session or California later this session. So yeah, just something to keep in mind, that there are bills out there that are supporting youth who are LGBTQ and who are not, to try to make things a little bit better for their lives. And then the next slide, we have some links to resources listed out for you all. I always feel like these presentations, like, they seem long and then they at some point start to go super fast. But there's links here to a variety of resources. National Center for Transgender Equality has ID Document Center, where they, by state, you can find out what's the requirements to change gender marker on different kinds of identification documents. And their website also has a lot of different terminology, definitions defined. In the poll questions, we also had some links if you wanted to know a little bit more about, like, different sexual orientation terminology, gender identity terminology. NCLR has a legal helpline, and we're a national organization. So I encourage you, if you have any questions or things that you need help with, or even you can share, with your clients as well. The phone number's there. You can also put a request on our website. And we, mainly do a lot of impact litigation, but do some individual rep. But what's good is that we're connected to a network of national attorneys that work at legal services orgs, and also law firms. And so we do try to do our best to connect you with resources, and also find, folks in your area that can assist you further. And then Williams Institute, if you just get on their email list, they do research throughout the year and send a lot of updates that can help you, stay active as time goes on, because there's definitely more research as time goes on about different harms from these systems, and different disparities that are happening for LGBTQ folks. And then National SOGI Center is also a great resource and does a lot of work for children and families. They have a variety of programs that are geared toward working to help reunify families, finding support for youth in foster care who don't know where their family network is. There's a program that they work with that assists with that. So I would just encourage folks to go to their website to learn a little bit more about the programs that they're a part of. And Tamara, I don't know if you want to mention a little bit more.
I think that the two that I'll highlight, the Gender Spectrum and Trevor Project, are ones that are truly my favorites. I think that they're great resources for families, and honestly, lots of people in lots of different areas. They kind of have different sections for youth, for families, for practitioners, for educators. And I think it's a great kind of go at your own speed learning thing. So I send lots of families who are really, trying to understand these issues and maybe are less familiar with them to those places. Trevor Project is especially good for youth. And they have an option where if you press escape 3 times when you're on the website, it will clear your history and exit you from the screen. So it's a really safe place for youth who are having questions and aren't comfortable doing that maybe at their home space or where they're looking things up. I know we're really out of time at this point. I see Christina's face. I know I'm fast and furious trying to respond to some questions in the Q&A, but thank you all so much for coming today. This was really wonderful. And I'm glad that we got to have this conversation.
And there's definitely CLE materials, that are in the link as well, that have a lot of resources for you all to refer to.
I want to thank you, Gina, Daniel, Tamara, and Danny for holding space for such an important, honest conversation. And thank you all for attending. We hope to see you all next month in Minneapolis at NACC 46th National Child Welfare Law Conference. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.